At this time, I'll call the Budget and Purchasing Committee meeting to order and ask Ashley, if you will, please call roll.
Cole. Lewis. Here. Mitchell.
Here.
Moon. Here. Samples. Here. You have a quorum.
I'll now ask if you'll do the emergency announcement, please.
Before we get started, let me read the emergency evacuation procedures. In the event of an emergency evacuation, an alarm will sound. Everyone should exit the building by way of the nearest stairwell in a safe and effective manner. If the nearest stairwell is blocked by smoke, use the other stairwell. Do not use the elevator. Once you have reached the main floor, follow the exit signs to exit the building and quickly proceed away from the building. Please be mindful of others evacuating and of emergency vehicles.
Okay, now I'll ask if there's public input on any items on the agenda. Come on up.
I would like to request that each and every one of you speak directly into your microphones during this meeting so we all can hear properly. Thank you.
Is there any other public input items on the agenda? Okay. Item D, Purchasing Commission, items 1, 2, and 3. These are for information only. The sole source purchases, the perishables, and the awarded bids. Item 4, resolution for Courthouse payroll HR system. I'll ask Bill Rayner to please come up. Okay, have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, go. All right. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Wasn't that, that was too good to be true. Members of the commission, thank you for allowing me to speak to you tonight. I think I've met with some of you before. We sent you a memo giving you a summary, a one-page summary update of the status of the HR payroll project. There is a mistake in the memo that I'd like to clarify. The first sentence references a 5-year spending commitment of $2.7 million. That number should be $2.3 million, and I apologize for the mistake and accept responsibility for it. The number is 2.3, which is the same number that you saw in the PowerPoint presentation. Other than that, I'd just like to say that since we were here last before the Budget Committee, we have concluded contract discussions and negotiations with Courthouse. The document that I believe you all have access to is 170 some odd pages long. I have been through it personally 3 times at least, and I know everybody on the project team has been through it several times as well. The county attorney, Craig Garrett, has approved the contract as to legal form, and we are satisfied that it protects the rights and obligations and interests of Blount County.
Okay, I'll ask, does anyone have any questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Bill, you do have a law degree and you've passed the bar exam in Tennessee.
That is true.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Bill, I'd just like to tell you how much we appreciate you doing this and putting all the work that I know you did into it. And you had a great team working with you, but I know they couldn't have done it without your leadership. And I just want to tell you how much I really appreciate what you've done for Blount County. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to help.
There was the issue arose, I guess, at the commission meeting the other night, and I just want to make sure it gets clarified here. The previous action of the commission was to approve the budget for this project. And then there was a question asked about, have we spent money on this project? The answer is no. We have spent no money out of what the commission has already approved, and it's not appropriate to spend any until this contract gets acted on. I will tell you that we have, because of the obligations of the county, we have incurred costs, one out of my budget, one out of the HR budget, to hire 2 interns from Maryville College to work with us in preparation of the county's obligations that we would have to perform to fulfill our contractual obligation here. But it did not come out of the budget. It's out of our operating budgets.
Anything else? Okay, any other comments? Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
We have it on the floor, a motion and a second to pass this on to the Agenda Committee with a favorable recommendation. Any other discussion? I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Cole?
Yeah.
Lewis? Yes. Mitchell?
Yes.
Moon? Yes. Samples? Yes. The motion's passed.
Okay. Item E, approval of the minutes. The minutes need approved. They're in your packet for you to read. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes? So moved. And a second. Second. I'll do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? I'll declare the motion passed. Item F, increase, decreases, and transfers, finance. F1A, Highway Department Fund 131, $1,200,000 state aid projects. Bill, do you want to come up and address this?
I will, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. As I talked to you all early on in the budget process, the state has given us a real deal this go-round. Our state aid bridges are going to be a match of 2%. When we won't talk about the revenues I lost, but Commissioner kept us $240,000 to meet the match. I greatly appreciate that. And I had 3 bridges that had to be, they were on first list. When you got them on the first list, that's the ones you do first. East Miller's Cove, estimated, these estimates are at $200,000 or $200 a square, okay? East Miller's Cove, the second bridge, Big Elm Road, $475,000, and Andy Harris, estimated out at $200,000. Those will be the 3 bridges that I'll be doing this year. I've got 2 more I'll do next year. But my fund balance is I'll have to pay for it. These are all 100% reimbursable. Once I pay for the projects, the monies will come back to me and go back into my fund balance. The other project I'm working with the state on, I thought we was going to have to acquire the right-of-way out of pocket, but the state is going to reimburse us for the default right-of-way. So we put that in there also to go ahead and cover that. Not knowing exactly what the contracts are going to be, I asked Julie to put into this budget increase a contingency of about 15%. So anything that we don't use will go back in. Everything we spend will come back to us and go back into our fund balance. So that's the reason for the budget increase I'm asking for tonight.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? Thank you, Bill.
I got another one there.
Okay, yeah. We'll have a roll call vote on this, please.
Cole? Yes. Lewis? Yes. Mitchell?
Yes.
Moon? Yes. Samples? Yes. The motion's passed.
Okay, and transfers, item 2A, Highway Department, $130,000 local option sales tax. We can have a motion, pass this on to the commission. Do I have a second? Have a motion and a second. Bill, I'll ask you to explain that.
What this is, again, we were very conservative on our estimate for sales tax. Julie estimated low. To meet the maintenance of effort, Randy and his staff found that we're going to need some money in there. Sales tax was up enough that we could do that, so that'll be for that purpose right there.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Okay, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Cole? Yes. Lewis? Yes. Mitchell?
Yes.
Moon? Yes. Samples? Yes. The motion's passed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Item G, discussion possible action, debt service fund balance policy. Randy, I'll ask you to lead us on this one.
This one's actually pretty simple from the standpoint, I get asked a lot what are acceptable levels to have on fund balance, and I thought we'd take this one bite at a time, and in the course of our discussions in closing and completing the audit process, we had asked for guidance from the comptroller's office about other counties and what their policies might be. The policy that basically we're submitting to you now for consideration would be that the county would typically have 1 year of future payments in fund balance in the debt service fund. That policy is almost verbatim from Roane County. So I'm bringing that in the form of a recommendation so that we can start establishing policies and guidelines for our fund balance.
Do I have a motion to move this on to the agenda committee? Have a motion, do I have a second? Motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman, Randy, you said this was after on the exit from the audit, exit interview, and your meeting with the comptroller 3 weeks ago.
Actually, it's not as a result of the exit conference with the auditors. We have not had that yet. It is just part of our conversations as we try to establish best practices for us. I've been asking them, Susan's been asking them, what are some of the other counties, what are some of the practices they have? And this was one that I thought we have a debt policy now that this body adopted in February 11, I think it was. That policy is reviewed obviously by the comptroller's office to make sure we comply, but in particular that has come up in the course of our refunding of the E3B debt, and it also came up in the refunding of our E1A and E5A debt a year ago. It is only appropriate, I thought, since we have the debt policy, that we probably ought to have a policy that addresses fund balance in our debt service fund so that we can at least have something that's compatible with each other. When and if interest rates ever rise in the future to where we have to be concerned about the tax implications of the arbitrage laws that were passed in 1986, it's going to be important that we have policies in place and not just operating by, whatever mood we have at the moment. So it's merely a recommendation that I think we ought to have something in place so that we've got some guidance going forward.
Okay.
Question, Randy, would it be, is you talking about having this as a separate policy, or would it be better to have this as a part of a subsection of the debt policy that's in place?
I would have it as a separate policy because you may want to change your fund balance policy and not impact your total debt policy.
Okay.
Debt policy has a lot of pieces to it. This one's pretty simple. I think we ought to, what I would hope is to bring something back to you for some of our other operating funds, and we would probably embed all of those fund balance policies into one document ultimately.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other? Yes, sir.
I got a question. So if the proposal gets approved and we add where we're going to keep a year's worth of financing in there, will that become part of the 15 budget process then, or how do we get the money in there?
Well, it's actually a guide. If you took a snapshot at June 30, our fund balance at June 30 that is being audited right now, somewhere just a little bit shy of $10 million. So if you were to adopt this policy, we would not technically meet the letter of this policy. We would actually be less. But if you believe that this policy is prudent, then we certainly wouldn't want to do anything that would deplete our fund balance and be counter to this. We have adopted policies here that the day we adopted them, we didn't necessarily comply with them. For example, we have a higher variable rate. Our debt that's attributed to variable rate is higher than our policy. What we're trying to do is to get down to that policy. It's like a goal. It's not absolutes. It's a goal.
What is that figure today, Rand? What would 1 year's debt service total?
We would be somewhere around $16 million.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I'll ask for a motion to pass this on to the agenda committee. Have a motion. Do I have a second? Have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Cole? Yes. Lewis? Yes. Mitchell?
Yes.
Moon?
Yes.
Samples? Motion's passed.
Item G2, actuarial report for general liability workers' comp funds. Go ahead and get it on the floor. Do I have a motion to send this on? And do I have a second? Have a motion and a second. I'll ask Don if you would please come up.
As you all know, we have a general liability and workers' compensation fund that is self-insured. We, to let us know where those funds are and to provide future funding for those funds, we actually use an actuarial service. About 3 years ago, we started using the actuarial service for both funds. Prior to that, about 2002, by the Department of Commerce and Insurance actually required us on the workers' compensation end to have actuarial study done that we gave to them. Started every other year, now it's annually. So about 3 years ago, we actually went out and had one also done on our general liability. We've been working with accounting and using the actuarial study over the past 3 years. We're starting to transition to it, to where now we're fully transitioned to it in not only letting us know where the fund is, but also in setting the fees that we charge the different departments to the funding for the fund. I thought y'all might want to take a look at it, and I've got Thomas Myers, who is the actuarial that actually did the study, and I've had Thomas come up. He'll give you a real brief overview and answer any questions that you have on the study.
Thank you, Don and Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. As Don said, my name is Thomas Meyer. My company, my firm is Select Actuarial Services. I have with me Jack Pippa and Sydney McIndoe, who work with me. Sydney has assisted me on this project, and then Jack assists me on the Johnson City analysis, and we're going to visit Johnson City tomorrow morning for a similar type of presentation. We've been working with Blount County since 2006. As Don said, that dates back to when the state started requiring those who self-insure their workers' compensation to have an annual actuarial report done and sent to the state. So that was our first opportunity to become engaged. And then Don said, as we've been doing that for a number of years, they moved to every year requiring that, and then we've taken a look at the liabilities as well. My firm, we're based in Nashville. We are a group that is specializes in self-insureds. We do that for both the private industry and public entities. We have about 30% of our business is with public entities. In Tennessee, we work with Metro Nashville, we work with Rutherford County, Sullivan County, Johnson City, and a few others as well. And then we work with counties and cities and states throughout the country. We work with the state of Tennessee as well. So our goal is to is to be able to provide an estimate of what the liabilities are for the county, because you retain that risk. Rather than paying an insurance company a lot of money and a profit margin and all those things, it makes sense from a financial point of view to retain that risk. So our goal is to help you guys comply with either state regulations or accounting regulations. For example, GASB 45 says you must recognize your liabilities on your balance sheet. So our goal, and in GASB 45, it talks about having an expert estimate what those costs are going to be. And so as an actuary, one that's a fellow of the Casualty Actuarial Society, that's my job, is to bring my expertise in figuring out, estimating what those liabilities are going to be. The county retains the first $500,000 of every loss. So pretty much a full self-insurance, but if you get a catastrophic claim, you have excess coverage for that. On the liability side, there is no excess coverage, but you've got the state tort limits involved, that the county as a public entity in Tennessee, there are some limits on the torts that you have that work for you. So, and as I mentioned, the state requires an actuarial, Insurance and Commerce as a self-insured requires an actuarial study done every year. The objectives of our study are twofold. When you look at retaining risk, there's two big pieces. There's the risk you've already taken on. So you've been self-insuring, you've been retaining risk, particularly in the well, actually in both sides, liability and comp. You have events that have happened in the past, but we don't know their final outcome. We've got a worker who got hurt on the job, maybe a back injury, and they've been out of work for a while, and that they're still having surgeries. We don't know what their final cost is going to be. They're only estimates available to us. Same with the liability case. You could have an incident that happened, say, a year ago, and somebody's just now getting ready to sue you. So there are all these things that come into play in terms of unknown outcomes, and our job is to try to provide the best estimate that's available given the tools, primarily the tools being what has happened to the county in the past, as well as some insurance and industry information to help us get estimates, get our hands around what's a reasonable estimate for these liabilities. Our second component is for looking forward. So if we're going to retain risk coming up in the next year, what are those costs going to be? We need to budget for those costs. And so you've got to have two things there. There's a reserve number that we're estimating. What do we still have left to pay on incidents or events that have already happened? So our date is 6/30, just like your fiscal year end. What's happened? Our study's based off of 6/30. What's happened before 6/30 that we need to still have to pay out on? What's the estimated cost of those? And then if we're budgeting for 14-15 or say 15-16 at this point, what are those costs going to be so that we be sure and set aside enough money or charge our departments what they need to pay in to be able to cover the cost of those employees or those lawsuits or those incidents that happen from a liability point of view, auto accidents, for example. So our reserve study was as of 6/30 that we did most recently, and our projections were for the 14-15 year, which then can be translated into estimates for the 15-16 year. And then as part of that forecast for 14-15, we provide Don with a allocation of that projections for forecast for the upcoming year so that he can charge the departments, highway, sheriffs, general services, all those departments, they can get their fair share. And that allocation is actually based off of some of their history. So we look back 3 or 4 years of information to see which departments are having the worst claims, as well as capping those claims so that for the really big ones, they aren't getting hit too hard. But we allocate the costs so that he can go and charge them. And there's a component of that that's sort of fairly does that in terms of whose costs, which departments are having the most cost. When we go to do our analysis, we collect information from Don and Lindsay in terms of getting information from Brentwood Services, which is the third-party administrator, the group that's in charge of adjusting the claims. They take each claim at the individual level and estimate the costs. And our job is to aggregate all those claims and estimate what they're going to cost in aggregate. Like I said, from a reserving point of view, what's happened in the past, and then from looking forward, what's going to happen in the future for the future claims. We also collect payroll information because we want to measure exposure, and that's what we get is the payroll information. And then we be sure and get what the county's excess policy is so that we reflect the fact that if you hit the $500,000 with a workers' comp claim, that in fact you have insurance for those bigger, higher cost claims. So the question is, why, if Brentwood Services, the TPA, is taking each claim and they're estimating what the cost of the claim is going to be, what is the purpose of the actuary? What is their job? So when we look at the claims in aggregate, their job is to look at each claim. For example, if we're talking about some analogy I often use as a forest, if they're going down and they're looking at each individual tree and trying to estimate the health of that tree, what that tree is going to end up, how big it's going to get, what's it going to cost, our job is to be the forester that's up in the top and looking out over the whole forest and trying to estimate, well, how big is this forest going to be? What's the health of the forest from the top view? And when you look at claims in the aggregate, you'll see that if the end of the year, let's say we just ended 2013-14, and at that point in the year we had $200,000 worth of estimated losses. Well, if you look at if you go back and say, look at a year like 2001, 2002, let's say it had $200,000 in costs and losses so far at the end of the year. Well, if you look at that claim, that group of claims a year later and a year later, you'll see that they grew. They grew from 200,000 to 400,000 and to 450,000 to 475,000. And that's just the nature of losses that we're dealing with. They can't know, the adjusters can't know exactly what each claim is going to cost. If you've got 5 back claims, they're going to get it right on 3 of them. They're going to be low on 1 of them, but they're going to miss 1. And it's not their fault. It's not that they're doing a bad job. It's just the nature of not knowing which surgery is going to go bad, which one's going to re-injure it. So when you look at the claims and statistics that we look at in aggregate, we're trying to estimate the big picture, and that's what our job is to do. It's called incurred but not reported losses. IBNR may be a term you've thrown around before. There's 2 components there. There's some piece for claims that have not been reported yet, true IBNR. So you've got somebody that got hurt 3 or 4 months ago. Now they've come forward and said, yeah, I was hurt that day. You've got a claim on your hands. Or somebody was in an accident, a GL situation, a general liability situation, and the suit doesn't come forward for a year. Those are true IBNR claims. Those are a much smaller piece of the pie. The bigger piece of the pie is the true but not enough reported, and that's what I talk about with those back claims. If you've got 5 back claims, 3 of them the adjuster will get exactly right. 1 he'll be too high on, and then it'll cost less, but then 1 will be 5 times as much, and that's not enough reported on that total book of business, on the total group of claims. And so that's what our job is to look at the top and estimate the costs. In your packet, I believe you have a summary of our, what we call the executive summary. So if you're interested in pulling that up, but I'm just going to go over some of the numbers just to give you an idea. And if you turn in that executive summary to page 2, there's a nice color, I don't know if it'll be in color for you guys, but a table. And it shows you, it gives you a piece of information that I think is useful in terms of what are our reserves, what's the estimated reserves that we come up with in our last analysis, and it also gives you a piece of workers' comp versus liability. So the total estimated outstanding, or the reserve estimate, or what's left to be paid on claims prior to 6/30. So this is, if the county were to go away today, but they needed to cover what they've already obligated themselves to do, that's what this number is. All these incidents have happened. It's a matter of paying them off and bringing them to final resolution. We're estimating $2,637,000. You can see that that's pretty evenly split between workers' compensation and auto liability, or auto and general liability. That last column shows 1.374 for workers' compensation, and auto is 1,263,000. So they're pretty evenly split. If you take a look at the case reserves versus so the case reserves are what the adjusters set. The IBNR is what we're estimating. You can see that there's a lot more IBNR for liability, and that's just because there's a lot more unknown related to liability in terms of what the costs are going to be with lawsuits. Whereas with workers' compensation, there's a lot less IBNR because there's a little bit, the adjusters, in this case for Brentwood Services, they do a good job of estimating the costs, and there's not as much in IBNR, at least in terms of the ratios. So that gives you an idea of what our estimate of the reserve balance should be reserved as of 6/30. Then if we project forward to 14-15, you can see below that the county's expected that we would say if the county insures for 2014-15, self-insures, which it is, it would need about $1.1 million to cover all the costs. Now, it's important to keep in mind, those aren't what you're going to pay in 2014-15. That's the cost of doing the business, or of self-insuring for the year. So I would expect it, say, at the end of 2014-15, of that $1.1 million, you might have paid $300,000, $400,000. It's over time that you're going to pay that out. But you want to go ahead and accrue that so that if you budget the $1.1 million now, put it in the reserve fund as you go through the year, then your reserve fund stays at the level that it should as you go by in time, as you incur more losses. Now, of course, when you look at these numbers, they're big numbers, but you don't have a lot of context because I've never come to you before. You can't say, well, what was the number? You haven't seen the numbers last year. The reserve number is up some, but the forecast number is about where it was a year ago. Work comp, particularly the last 2 years, have trended really well. The 2012-2013 year is one of the lowest cost years that you guys have had in about 10 to 15 years. And 13-14 that we just finished in a pretty good place, about 11% less than we had projected it would be. So the trends for workers' comp are are in good shape. Another stat that I'll throw out there for you, your average cost for 14-15 is about 74 cents per $100 of payroll. And that's usually how workers' compensation insurance is quoted, in $100 of payroll. So 74 cents per $100 of payroll, that is one of the lowest in the state of Tennessee, at least the counties that I work with. And anytime you're doing less than $1 per day per payroll, per $100 of payroll, particularly if you've got a heavy equipment type or relatively dangerous departments like highways and sheriffs. So if you've got those two departments that are pretty to a pretty high level that the Blount County does, keeping that rate at 74 cents per $100 of payroll is impressive, and it's a good sign. If you look at the overall picture, give me something that I can take away from your actuarial report. From a liability point of view, one of the interesting things is I was just talking to Don earlier when we got together before today and noticing that the last 6 years have averaged in costs about $350,000 to maybe $375,000 in liability costs. If you look at the previous 4 years, they were all over $1 million. So the last 6 years have been remarkably well from a liability point of view, particularly if you look at where the county had been in terms of averaging more than $1 million per year and just paying out liability costs, and that's dropped down to about an average of $375,000. So those are the good takeaways. As I mentioned, we provide a projection of the different departments, the highway department, sheriffs, county general, and schools. Everybody gets an allocation piece of our forecast, and that generally breaks down to about sheriffs and schools each getting 40%, with the highway department getting 11% and the county general getting 6%. And that's in your packet if you're curious about what our estimated costs are for each of the departments. And if you have interest in taking a look at that, what's in your packet, it's the executive summary. It spells out the objectives of our report. There's a discussion. One of the important things we look at is what happened over the last 12 months. Because we do this every year, we have projections of what we think will happen over the next 12 months from year to year, and we see how we're doing in relative to those projections. So there's a discussion about how how the county has done over the last 12 months. And then there's a summary of results in terms of the numbers that I just went through with you, and then there's the tables that provide the auditors and Don and all the different folks with the information that they need. So that's my 10, 15 minute, whatever we did, overview of what we do and some of the results that we're seeing for the county. Are there any questions that you all have for me and what we do for you all?
Is there any questions? Thank you. I guess we need to get this on the floor to pass it on to I guess we're passing the actual.
Well, actually, it's just information that will go on automatically to the full commission, but.
Okay, it doesn't have to be, we don't have to send it on?
No.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Item 3, the notice from the federal government on the sequestration. You want to give us an update on that one, Randy? We just had some good news. Let's see where are we going with this.
Well, Ashley's included a memo in your packet and this will go on to the full commission as well. This just lets you know that again, we've received notice from the federal government that the bonds that we issued to build schools where we were to get a rebate of the interest expense by the federal government as part of the, I forgot what the acronym was. ARA, yeah, the American Recovery Act stimulus package. we've received a notice that they are going to sequester 7.3% of that. So this will be the second year in a row that we have coming up where we have not received a full rebate of that interest expense. And we got the notice last week. We're just making you aware of it now.
Jerome?
We pay it in, and then they send it back, but they short us sending it back. Is that correct, Randy?
That is correct.
Randy, what will that figure be? Do we know? Is it on there?
$333,798.98. And we typically would have gotten, before sequestration, we would have received $360,085.20.
Was that budget, did we budgeted that amount in?
Our budget reflects the reduction.
Okay.
So we have a net cost to this.
Okay, thank you.
I know this is a silly question, but have they ever said they intend to catch that up, repay that sequestration?
I can only use what little bit of logic I have available to me. If they couldn't agree to do anything on a budget, I don't think they can agree to make up for their lack of action.
I knew it was a silly question.
When we entered into that bond with them, and was there not a contract in that had the verbiage that said they would give us that money back, that we could fall back on and say, you're not following the letter of the contract on this? Is there any way?
The Congress passed the law. This comes from the Internal Revenue Service. This is basically the Internal Revenue Service approving that rebate. And we're basically not going to get it back, regardless of what the documents say. They make the rules. Wow. And basically what has happened is Congress passed a law, and now they have passed another law that says we are not willing to agree to what we told you initially. And no, that makes no sense, but that's what they've done. And this applies to every government that used this program. So we're not being singled out. We're being treated the same way everyone else was treated.
Okay, is there any other questions? Okay, move on to item 4, the bond refunding resolution. Randy, present this item, please.
Yes, you have, in your packet, you have the bond resolution that supports the action and that the commission took in its special meeting, which is to instruct me to pursue a fixed rate financing scenario for the refunding of the E3B bonds. On Friday, we submitted the official refunding proposal to the state Comptroller's Office of State and Local Finance. I received confirmation this morning that they in fact received our plan. We met with them preliminarily after commission voted to advise them that we were going to pursue that refunding plan, and they were pleasantly surprised that this body was considering fixed rate financing and termination of swaps. I am recommending that you send this resolution on to the agenda committee tomorrow night, since it was an action of the full commission that directed us to do this. And then Mark Mamontov, our bond counsel, will be here at the meeting tomorrow night to discuss any specifics of the bond resolution that you may have.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Any other discussion? I'll ask for a roll call.
Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead.
So this went in the packet, so there's 20 days before the commission would vote. If 20 days it's available to contact you, do research. Is my math right on the days, Mr. Pena?
Yes, sir. You're going to be asked, the commission, if they put it on the agenda, will be asked on the 20th to vote on this. I guess I would consider the notice provisions to be a little more generous than that, since you acted in a special meeting last month to hear the presentation and then had a separate meeting to vote on it. This is the next step in the natural progression, which is to provide you with a bond resolution which authorizes this debt to be issued. And then I'll have the bond attorney here tomorrow night for any questions that you may have regarding the resolution.
Because the way the calendar falls with Veterans Day and the courthouse being closed on the 11th, which would normally be the agenda committee meeting, we have an extra week, which instead of having
That is
8,
correct.
9, 10 days to review this, the full commission has 20 days to review.
That's correct. And one distinction in this resolution that you would notice right off the bat from any other resolution, this contemplates both taxable piece of debt, which would be to amortize to pay off the termination fees to get out of the swaps, and it also includes a taxable piece, which is to refund the variable rate financing that's outstanding. So the aggregate amount would be not to exceed $27.5 million. The reason we put that cushion in there is it's variable rate, so the market is changing as we speak.
Any other discussion? Yes, Thomas.
I have one question. Is there any verbiage in here that requires that we try to negotiate those termination fees? Because my understanding is they are negotiable.
There is no direct language about negotiations, but that is a part of the discussion that we will have with Deutsche Bank in the course of, we have no, the answer to your question is simply no, there's no reference to negotiation. That is a natural piece of what I will do in the course of, one, if you approve this, we have to schedule a public building authority meeting to have the swaps novated back to the county so that we then have the authority to do the negotiation, because right now we don't have the authority. The counterparty is Blount County's public building authority. And we are in a very highly regulated piece of business now, thanks to the wisdom that comes out of Washington. And it is very complicated now, but I can assure you that we will be trying our best to negotiate substantial reductions in those termination fees.
Any other questions? Randy, when this was presented to the commission, there were 4 options that they had. This was the option they chose, correct?
This was option 3B. There were 2 fixed rate scenarios. One, fixing a rate and leaving the amortization schedule as is, which is retiring principal in the years 2030, 2031. Then I'd had several commissioners express the desire, can we pay off the debt sooner? Well, this enabled to accomplish that, we have requested, and the bond resolution states that it would be level amortization of that principal $20 million each year over the life of what remains. You're not extending the term of the loan or the bonds, you're merely paying the debt off sooner. And this would be option 3B, the second of the fixed rate options.
Okay.
And you are correct, there were 4 options proposed.
And this, we're voting just to send this on to the agenda committee.
That's my recommendation.
Okay. Do I have a motion? Motion's on the floor. I had a second. Okay. I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Cole? Yes. Lewis? Yes. Mitchell? Mitchell?
Yes.
Moon?
Yes.
Samples? The motion's passed.
Okay. You have the finance report. That's for information only. I'll now ask for any input on items not on the agenda. Yes.
I actually have a question about something I was listening to tonight. And this actuarial report, apparently what you're saying is because we self-insure, the state tells us we have to hire a company to make a guess for us? Is that the way that is? To guess how many losses we're going to have? The state requires that?
Governments can't enter into any self-insurance program and not have them funded in a way that allows them to operate as if a private insurance company were running them.
So this actually is almost like an unfunded mandate that they tell us we have to hire this company if we're going to operate our business that way.
No, we basically have opted to run a self-insurance program. They did
But
not
because
tell
we
us to do that. They
so
just
what
set
do we-
guidance.
Okay, so what do we actually pay a company to make a guess for us what our losses will be?
What, you know offhand, Don, what our fee is for? It's about $6,500 total.
Okay. Because what I was comparing it to was like when they told us because we didn't have fixed rate bonds and we had swaps, that we had to hire a company like PFM. And once we get everything into a regular, to where we have a rate, we don't have to have that company anymore, correctly? Am I correct in that? They only said we had to have an outside firm because we had swaps.
We're not going to turn this into a question and answer. If you
Okay.
have questions, you need to put them in
I was
written
just
form.
comparing it
Okay.
to this other situation.
This is comments on items not on the agenda.
Well, that wasn't on the agenda, so whatever.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.